7 men sailed from Africa to America in a boat made of papyrus reeds. Men determined to discover whether it is possible that ancient people at the dawn of history, sailed across oceans in handmade reed boats and spread their civilization to other continents and islands of the sea. Preposterous, the experts say. Ocean waves will break their boat to pieces. The salt water will dissolve the papyrus. But the possibility haunts the famous builder of the raft Kontiki. And so he, Thor Heyerdahl, builds a papyrus boat himself, and he calls it Ra. Why does Heyerdahl find this challenge so fascinating? The key to that question is carved on the chest of an ancient stone statue on Easter Island, far off the west coast of South America. A reed boat on an island where once no reeds grew, but because they grow from slips and not from wind-blown seeds, had to be brought there by men. Brought how? In what sort of boats? Other things had been brought by ocean-going men to Easter Island and other islands nearby. Pyramids, now reduced to these temple platforms, and once great step-shaped monuments dedicated to the worship of the sun god, Ra. Architecture, stones accurately carved and fitted together. Reed boats, still sailing like ghosts in paintings on temple walls, and in these models with one or more sails carved long ago in stone. The older natives of Easter Island still know the art of making boats of reeds. They use the Totoro reed, a characteristic South American variety. Heyerdahl believes that the ancestors of these natives brought the reed with them from America and planted it in the fresh water of Easter Island's crater lakes. The natives build 2 kinds of boats, one for swimming near the shore, afloat, in the shape of an elephant tusk. The other, a boat with raised bow and stern, which can be built in any size, large or small, which the natives say is completely worthy for sailing the sea. More than 25 years ago, Heyerdahl began to wonder how the culture and vegetation of South America came to Easter Island and beyond Polynesia. Peru's coastline is the nearest to the Pacific Islands. From there, the ocean currents flow inexorably toward them. Heyerdahl sailed these currents in 1947 in a raft he made of balsa wood, sailed them far past Easter Island to show how ancient people might have traveled westward to Polynesia. But in Peru, ancient people not only made rafts of balsa logs, they also constructed huge reed boats capable of carrying tons of cargo. On Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes Mountains, Heyerdahl found Peruvians making reed boats with sails supported by a remarkable double mast, lashed together at the top. Shortly after the year 1500, when the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they found large reed boats with 12-man crews at sea off the coast of Peru. Today, there are only small one-man floats, exactly like those on Easter Island. A 1,000 years before Columbus, the South American Indians made pottery models of reed boats which they buried near the coast in the graves of their mummified dead. A man with a bird's head was often depicted together with the reed boats exactly as had been the practice in ancient Egypt, and remarkably, on Easter Island too. Ancient Peruvian pictures show the birdman intimately associated with the reed boat. The oldest reed boat builders in Peru and Bolivia left behind large numbers of giant statues, as well as temple walls of huge blocks fitted together like those on Easter Island. When Europeans arrived, they found stepped pyramids like those on the islands of Polynesia, and from the summit, the Indians of Peru worshipped the sun. Their pyramid of the sun is the largest still preserved. It and the Cerro Colorado pyramid on the coast further north are temple pyramids, built as in ancient Mesopotamia with millions of sun-dried bricks. Pyramids in Peru and Polynesia, and 1,000 miles to the north on the plains of Mexico too. And in each place, dedicated to a worship intimately connected with the sun. Even more remarkably, pyramid building began suddenly in both Peru and Mexico, and at the same moment of history. Reed boats in ancient Mexico too. European explorers found them all along the coast from Peru to San Francisco Bay in California and in various parts of Mexico. The last people to use reed boats in this area are the remote Seris Indians on the coast of the Sonora Desert, where Hayadar was able to catch them putting out to sea after turtles. He discovered the same masonry technique in Mexico as in Peru and Easter Island. And gigantic statues of ancient rulers, their divine ancestor, the sun, carved on their backs. Hayadar was fascinated not only by these parallels between American and island cultures, but also by the fact that the same architecture, religion, reed boats, and pyramids are found in Egypt too. Experts said the similarities between Egypt and the Americas could only be coincidence, for Mexico's pyramids have no burial chambers as Egypt's have. But in 1949, a secret passageway was discovered leading down into the interior of the Mexican pyramid at Palenque. Experts and Hayadar himself were amazed, for here in the dense jungle, where there is a superabundance of timber but little stone, the jungle Indians had constructed a stone pyramid with an inner tunnel according to precisely the same methods employed by the ancient Egyptians. A heavy stone doorway led into a burial chamber over which the entire pyramid had been built. A magnificent stone lid weighing several tons covered a sarcophagus. A splendid mass covered the face of the remains of the Sun King's mummy, the flesh long since rotted away by the action of the jungle's humidity. But some people still argued that Egyptian pyramids are not step-shaped like Mexican, Peruvian, and Polynesian ones. But here again, similarities prevail. There are step-shaped pyramids in Egypt alongside the other kind. Consider the similarities between Egypt and the Americas. The same technique for fitting together huge stone blocks. The same architecture in the pyramid tunnels which support hundreds of thousands of tons overhead. The same burial chambers for divine sun kings in this sarcophagus, where Pharaoh Cheops once lay, and here in the neighboring pyramid lay his son, Pharaoh Khephren. The same step shape of the pyramids as in Mexico, Peru, and Polynesia. Here the world's oldest, Saqqara Pyramid. The same colossal monument to the Sun King, and the reed boat. These models in the Cairo Museum were made over 3,000 years ago. They show long dead fishermen aboard vessels of lashed together papyrus reeds. Twin oars tied together steer the boats, a mechanism which is neither the single Viking-type steering oar nor the true vertical rudder. A bas-relief shows papyrus being cut and transported for use in boat building. Coils of rope bind the reeds together. An extra thick rope runs along the length of the deck. On a large reed boat, the captain, sitting on his cabin roof, commands a crew of 21 men. Many boats had sloping double masts with sails wider at the top than at the bottom, and a complicated rigging which is evidence of a truly sophisticated sailing technique. Ship's provisions consisted of cooked food, dried meat and fruit, live poultry in cages, water and oil in jars, bread in baskets, and beneath the boat, fish which were caught with hook and line. Egyptians living in the Nile Delta had close contact with the Phoenicians and their neighbors, who also built pyramids and worshipped the sun. Carvings from ancient Nineveh show fish swimming under reed boats which curve up at each end. Flat cut-off sterns are shown on the coastwise boats sailing inside the reed marshes. We are witnessing an ancient battle. A crab indicates that this is, in fact, the ocean and not a river. Men and women flee from death ashore out to sea. They are escaping in reed boats, but where to? We do not know. But from Asia Minor and Egypt, culture spread to the Mediterranean islands and finally to Europe. On the Greek island of Corfu and on Sardinia, reed boats have survived to the present day. On Sardinia, there are now only small boats with cut-off sterns like those of ancient Nineveh, but they do have the exceptional buoyancy of all reed boats. From the islands of the inland sea, the reed boat penetrated the Straits of Gibraltar to the Atlantic Ocean. Here at Lixus, on the Atlantic coast of Africa, the Berbers still build reed boats on the very spot where the Phoenicians founded the city nearly 3,000 years ago. The Atlantic Ocean stretches between South America and this point in Africa, where the ruins of megalithic structures built with familiar techniques are found. These, too, were oriented to the sun. They were built not quite 3,000 years ago, at the same time as civilization began on the facing coast of America. In the old world, there were reed boats and pyramids. Then suddenly, and at about the same time, they appeared in America and then in Polynesia. Could the sea have carried sailors westward 2,000 years before Columbus? The ocean currents circulate on a fixed course. One of them, the one that will carry Ra, moving from North Africa to tropical America and meeting land in the Gulf of Mexico. Precisely where water meets land in the Gulf of Mexico, where ancient reed boats might have washed ashore, America's oldest sculptures with marked Negroid features stare at us from the past. Just as remarkable as these are other legacies of the mysterious Olmec civilization. Carvings of bearded heads with Semitic features which cannot be of native Indians who were beardless. Indeed, the Indians had legends of bearded white men who sailed from the east many generations ago. How had they traveled? Certainly not in balsa boats, for there is no balsa in the Mediterranean. And therefore, the voyage of Kon-Tiki, which had proven so much about travel from the Americas, had no bearing upon the solution to this puzzle. Could the Olmecs have sailed in reed boats? Heyerdahl decided that there was only one way to find out, to build such a boat and set sail himself. So he journeyed to Chad in Central Africa, where the ancient art of making boats of reeds still flourishes.
In the Republic of Chad lies the little desert village of Bol on the southernmost border of the Sahara. No road leads here to Bol, only caravan tracks through the desert. Here, the Aboriginal culture has remained unchanged for thousands of years, and it would live on independent if our own entire civilization were to be destroyed. I came to Bol because here the papyrus boat of ancient times was still in use, and I had something to learn from the experienced boat builders of the Buduma tribe. Here I met Omar and Abdullah for the first time.
The village of Bol lies on Lake Chad, a large inland sea. Here the Buduma people live on floating islands of vegetation. After they have been to market in Bol, they swim home with their shopping on reed bundles. While other tribes make dugout canoes of tree trunks, the Buduma continue to use their forefathers' boats, made from bound-together papyrus, a reed which grows abundantly round the lake shores. The Buduma are pleased to show Heyerdahl how they build their craft. They begin at the bow end, using a single reed split into 4 parts. They insert other reeds into the middle and bind the ends together with rope. They fatten the bow by constantly inserting new reeds. Fibers scraped clean from palm leaves are braided into durable ropes. Gradually, the bundle thickens and begins to look like a boat, its bow curved upward. The bow is finished off in an elegant tip. But not so the stern. That is chopped off straight, just like the coastwise boats of ancient Nineveh. For this craft will never be launched on the high seas, only on Lake Chad. Heyerdahl finds the reed boats of Lake Chad fantastically buoyant and steady. It is his first time in a papyrus boat, and he begins to believe that papyrus might well be capable of carrying men across the sea.
Here I could find all the papyrus I needed. and boat builders who could build a papyrus boat as large as I wanted. But there was neither railway, road, nor river leading to the sea, so I could not get all the papyrus I needed out of the country. The boat builders, though, I could arrange the long journey for. I explained to the interpreter, Abdullah, that he should ask Omar if he would build me a boat in Egypt together with his brother Musa. Including Abdullah, whom I needed as interpreter, I required 3 men. But where, then, was I now to obtain the papyrus? I went to the sources of the Nile in Ethiopia.
At Tisisat Falls, the world of the Nile divides into 2 levels. Above the falls, on the Ethiopian high plateau, papyrus still grows, and up there, at the sources of the Nile, the papyrus boat is still in use. Both double-ended and cut-off boats are still used by the Laki tribes and the Coptic monks who live on the islands. Led by the Coptic monks, Hayadal sets off to choose the best place for getting all the papyrus he needs. He arranges to have it cut, dried, and transported across the mountains to the Red Sea coast. 12 tons of dry and inflammable papyrus reeds are shipped from the shores of Lake Tana through the troubled war zone at the Suez to Cairo in the Nile Valley. The papyrus reed is a soft flower stem, spongy on the inside. A child can crush it in his hand. Dry, it snaps like a matchstick and burns like paper. But wet, with its thin, watertight skin, it becomes flexible and extraordinarily tough. Only the cut ends will absorb water.
Abdullah, Omar, and Musa seemed most pleased with the material. But when I showed them the building site, they asked me where the lake was in which to soak all the papyrus. It had first to be dried in the sun so as not to rot, but then it had to be soaked so as not to break. I had to start hauling water out into the desert in drums. Björn Landström, the leading expert on prehistoric Egyptian boat types, got to see real papyrus for the first time and how light it was in the water.
The papyrus has to be soaked, so a water tank is improvised. But the reeds float so well, it costs 3 men great difficulty and time just to submerge a single bundle, and Hayadal has shipped in 500 bundles. On the basis of many years' study in museums and burial chambers, Björn Landström draws the plans for the boat. Like all the other experts, he is certain from the start that a papyrus boat will sink after a couple of weeks. Nevertheless, Landström is keen to see the boat built, if only to test its sailing qualities. The 3 shipwrights from Chad use the techniques they employed at home. At the same time simple and sophisticated, their method is to squeeze the porous ends of the papyrus together to make them watertight, and to keep them so by wedging the reeds in under one another like a seabird's feathers. Each bundle is then bound firm with rope. Many bundles are afterwards lashed together. They tie only 3 large bundles when they are battered by a sandstorm from the Sahara. The sand-filled wind stabs against the tents, ripping away the lighter reeds from the unfinished stern and drying out the papyrus that has been so laboriously soaked. The boat is in danger of becoming airborne before it ever reaches the sea. They act quickly to protect what they have made from blowing away. After 3 days of storm, the papyrus reeds are so dry and brittle they break at the touch, a disturbing state of affairs for material that is meant to carry 7 men across an ocean. The reeds must be watered once again, this time from hand-carried jars, before the work can resume. So far, the boat has been lying on its side. The workers roll it upright. The first of many curious tourists begin turning up.
So far, everything had gone according to plan, exactly as at home in Chad, and strictly according to the ancient illustrations in the burial chambers around us. But our boat builders from Chad wanted to slice off the stern just the way they did at home. They said that no boat had bows at both ends. All my attempts at getting them to build a raised stern in the manner of the ancient Egyptians were utterly fruitless. I also called on Egypt's foremost expert on ancient boat types, Ahmed Joseph, who was in the process of reconstructing Pharaoh Cheops' wooden ship at the foot of the Great Pyramid, but neither he nor Landström were able to persuade Abdullah. Our 2 academicians tried to teach our friends from Chad how the stern should be built, but Abdullah insisted that one could begin a papyrus reed forward and add more and more toward the rear, but one could not thin them out again so as to make them come to a point at the stern. After 2 days of discussion and a gift of a watch to each of them, our friends finally allowed themselves to be persuaded. Landström was completely exhausted when our boat builders finally agreed to try to make a boat that curved upward to a point in the stern as well.
Through lack of experience, the shipwrights provide a pitifully weak and thin rear end for an ocean-going ship. Supervised by the 2 learned consultants, the boat nevertheless receives the shape of its ancient prototypes. And Abdullah has not only curved the bow and stern upward to withstand the waves, but in order to match the ancient design, and for reasons unknown to Abdullah and Hayadal, he must also curve it inward like a scorpion's tail. It wasn't long before the local guides added a new attraction to their tours and a source of extra piastres. Among the first visitors were Hayadal's wife, Yvonne, and their daughters. There is one hazard Hayadal has not anticipated, a boat-eating camel. The more boat-like the bundles grow, the more tourists are attracted. It becomes impossible to work. Guards try to keep back the crowds from the fragile boat, but the people trample down the barriers, the bone-dry reeds snapping under their feet and disappearing for souvenirs. There is another hazard, fire. Unfortunately, the guard can't read. Despite the danger of everything going up in smoke, they decide to work at night to be free from tourists. They have been at it for over a month, but in order to get to sea before the Caribbean hurricanes, they must launch within 2 weeks. One ill-flown spark will send everything up in flames, so they decide to stop the night shift. The men from Chad and their Egyptian helpers eventually strengthen the stern, but it is still a source of worry.
All the experts thought that the inward curve of the stern had only been intended by the ancient Egyptians as beautification, and that the rope depicted by the wall paintings slanting down from the top of the stern to the deck merely served to retain the shape of the lowly curve. It was later to cost us dearly to learn that both this arc and the rope had an entirely different function. The arc, in fact, was supposed to serve as a spring, pulling the aft deck up. But no one knew that any longer.
As a result, neither Heyerdahl nor his experts make any protest when the boat builders from Chad insist on removing the rope, since the stern still curves up without it. The finishing touch is a thick cable which, in the ancient Egyptian manner, is to be attached as a kind of railing round the entire reed boat. Georges Sourial, who has just joined the expedition, knows of some potters near Cairo who still work as they did in ancient times. Heyerdahl and his consultants decide to have all the parts made here, everything needed for storing water and provisions aboard a papyrus boat. Their models are taken from a Cairo museum. The voyage requires 166 jars. The boat completed, it is ready to be hauled from the sands of the desert to the nearest road. These are not slaves who are pulling Ra in the biblical way, but 500 enthusiastic physical education students who are anxious to lend a hand. The papyrus boat moves from the shadows of the pyramids, first pulled by chanting Egyptians, then carried on a truck to the Egyptian port of Alexandria, and at last borne by ship to the ancient Phoenician port of Safi on the Atlantic coast of Morocco.
Here, the reed boat was to enter water for the first time. Would it list? Would it capsize? Many expected it to sink, for according to some papyrus experts, seawater dissolved papyrus. Our papyrus boat had been baptized Ra. Ra was the name of the sun on all the islands of Polynesia, and it was also the name of the sun and the sun god himself in ancient Egypt.
For the very first time, the crew of Ra meet each other. Norman Baker, America, engineer, naval commander, ship's navigator. Carlo Mori, Italy, mountaineer, the cameraman. Dr. Yuri Senkevich, Soviet Union, ship's physician. Dr. Santiago Genovese, Mexico, anthropology professor, ship's purser and quartermaster. Georges Sourial, Egypt, chemical engineer, frogman. Abdullah, Africa, papyrus expert. How do you fix a mast onto a reed boat? Abdullah's driving a giant needle with which to sew large wooden blocks onto the deck as a footplate. Sourial is threading the needle and, with the crew members on deck, sticking it back and forth through the boat until the wooden blocks can be firmly fastened down. The two-legged mast are lashed to an L-shaped timber, and that to the blocks.
Many people. For this boat.
The result is a straddling mast like the ones on ancient Egyptian papyrus boats. Behind the cabin, they build a steering bridge to support the rudders, which are made of 25-foot timbers with blades as large and wide as the average writing desk. The day of departure, May 25th, 1969. Ra is towed by Moroccan fishermen out of the harbor.
We were 7 men from 7 countries. I wanted to show that people are people no matter where they come from, so our flags from east and west, north and south, were flanked by 2 blue flags of the United Nations.
Planes and boats follow for a few hours. Then they are alone on the Atlantic, swept by strong currents southward along the Moroccan coasts. The trade winds fill the sails. If only the reed bundles will continue to float, if only they will hold together, the west winds and currents will carry them to America. Sinbad the duck, intended for the cooking pot, but never eaten. Her playmate Sophie, a parting gift. At the outset, the first of a series of troubles. The one professional seaman aboard, Baker, falls ill with fever. All the rest are landlubbers, including Sophie, who's more interested in the provisions than the condition of the boat. Then, the first day out, more serious trouble. The rudders, both of them, snap under the force of the waves. Without rudders, they drift and wallow helplessly in hazardous waters off the rocky coast of the Sahara. In an effort to keep the stern in the wind, they lower their oars in makeshift fashion into the place of the rudders. But then more trouble strikes. The yardarm breaks and the sail has to come down. No rudder, no sail. They throw out the sea anchor and hope for the best. And the American navigator remains in bed with fever for 3 more days, treated by the Russian doctor. But then he's at the masthead, superintending repairs, and Carlo Mori is ingeniously repairing the broken rudder bay with rope. They are for a moment optimistic. But no sooner are the oars set to function as rudders than they break again. The Pirates is giving no trouble at all. But the wooden part of the boat is snapping and splintering like matchsticks. Compass is useless. Ra drifts, and the crew worries constantly about smashing against rocks or being run over by ocean-going ships. To Heyerdahl's immense relief, he discovers that although his rudder is completely broken, 2 vertical oars, which are secured in the forward section, help to steady the boat. The boat is stabilized. A week passes. America is still a long way off. The trade wind fills the sails. They cannot do otherwise, they find, than follow the current.
During our close contact with the sea, we discovered to our horror that the Atlantic is polluted. All the way, even out in the mid-ocean, we sailed through regions full of asphalt-like lumps of oil. It was an unexpected and shocking discovery, which we reported to the United Nations.
As long as the stern remains intact, Ra rides like a swan over the waves. Everyone is safe and dry on board for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Norman, the navigator, finds the latitude with his sextant, Hyodor with his homemade nose-ometer. The crew divides assignments for keeping the ship in order. The food in jars keeps safe and dry. They have nothing canned or frozen on board. Flying fish, enough to keep the crew well fed. The dining table is a chicken coop, so the poultry never have very far to go. Despite some early troubles, the voyage of Ross seems to be going well. But one day, the crew gets a shock. The stern of the boat is beginning to sink, and water is washing on board. At first, they make the best of it. They even use the afterdeck as a wash basin. But as the stern continues to sink, the situation grows intolerable.
It became so bad that we kept up all our papyrus life belts so as to provide Abdullah material with which to build the aft railing higher. But he soon needed more papyrus, and we were forced to cut up our 2 papyrus life rafts as well. Carlo tried to raise the sunken aft section with a whole jungle of ropes, but everything was in vain. The stately but rigid wooden ships of the pharaohs would have broken up in the waves and sunk. Their idea with papyrus boats, however, was that the flexibility would allow them to bend with large waves. While the forward and middle sections were securely held up by the mast by means of numerous stays, the aft section would flex up and down by itself, held up by a stay of its own running down from the curved stern, which acted as a large spring. But today, no one knew this, and since we lacked that rope, even though the stern retained its beautiful curve, the aft section sank slowly but surely. Too late, we had made an important discovery.
The situation is serious. Surya can take his mind off it momentarily while he puts the children to bed. But then the crew must hold an urgent strategy meeting. It seems to them that if they don't do something quickly, they will sink. They decide upon a desperate course of action in spite of the danger involved. They will cut up their only remaining life raft, a foam rubber one, and use the pieces to bring up the sunken aft section. Abdullah says his prayers. The rest bed down wondering whether they will be afloat in the morning. Morning arrives. No further sinking. Better, they all feel, to cling to large papyrus bundles in case of disaster than to venture out into little foam rubber raft. They begin cutting it up and building up the after section. Foam rubber is a far cry from papyrus. The waves break it up and wash it out to sea. Everything follows the undulations of the papyrus, so wooden structures break or are ground into sawdust. Many jars have holes worn into them, or they break. The rudder oars are spliced and spatchcocked from end to end, but not a single papyrus reed is damaged, for the wooden parts break constantly. The cross log holding the rudder oars is sunk so deep, it slows the boat down and has to be sawn off.
We had been sailing for nearly 2 months, had experienced the Atlantic in both storm and fair weather, and were now accustomed to living on a listing boat whose aft section lay underwater. Then we arrived in the area where the American hurricanes at that very moment were developing. And here, with a week sailing to the West Indies still before us, we sailed into the worst storm we had ever encountered.
After the storm, Ra is no longer herself. The sail is down, everything in chaos. Half the boat is underwater. They are surrounded by small pieces of papyrus torn from the starboard side where ropes have been chewed off in the storm. Sharks swim among the papyrus. The boat must be sewn together with new rope so that all the papyrus will not be swept away, for the sharks are an ever-present problem.
So they all went down to check the bottom. To everyone's relief, he was able to report that the papyrus hull was as good as before. A few barnacles, but otherwise ship-shape. Sharp. More and more of them arrived, and it became impossible to continue repairs.
The expedition is getting close to the West Indies. Hyodor radios to a small yacht, the Shenandoah, which he has chartered to meet Ra with film cameramen. But whether the boat will hold together for the rest of the voyage is a serious question.
We kept losing more and more of the papyrus that was supposed to keep us afloat, and the starboard mast lost its support, so we had to take down the sail. The situation was critical.
After a turbulent 3 days of thrashing about in the 20-foot waves of a storm and desperately trying in the storm to make contact with the Shenandoah, the crew of Ra joyfully sight the little yacht.
Everyone was firmly determined to continue. There was only 1 week sailing more if we rigged up a small sail on the bundles that were still undamaged. But I was the one responsible, and the experiment was not worth the risk of human lives. 2 days later, I decided to let the remains of Ra drift on alone, and we moved over to the Shenandoah.
Their first thought, as they move over to the Shenandoah, is to salvage the film equipment and everything that cannot withstand water. Before they abandon Ra, they cut down the heavy mast and take off everything that can be salvaged.
Onto the deck of the Shenandoah was landed plenty of food and water from the Ra. Before the 7 of us, with our monkey and our duck, had transferred over, we had hoisted a makeshift sail on the papyrus boat. It was sad to abandon Ra so close to our goal. Despite all our beginners' mistakes, Ra was still afloat after 2 months, not just for 2 weeks. A lasting friendship had arisen during the 8 weeks aboard the papyrus bundles, but none of us dreamed that within 10 months we would be sailing together again on Ra 2. Ra 1 continued alone toward America.
Heyerdahl is determined to try again. And this time, in order to find his shipwrights, he goes to Lake Titicaca in Peru, where there have been reed boats with sails from time immemorial. Reed boats are still being built here better than anywhere else in modern times. These boats are unusual, for they, like the ancient Egyptian boats, have raised sterns as well as raised prows. 2 fat reed bundles lashed together with a continuous spiral rope form the main hull of the vessel. Squeezed in between the 2 is a 3rd smaller bundle, wedged into the lashings and disappearing as the main rope is pulled tighter. Such South American boats are astonishingly similar to those once built 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt.
Santiago Genovese visited these Aymara Indians to find boat builders willing to come with us to Morocco in Africa and help to build Ra 2. 4 Indians agreed to come together with a Bolivian interpreter. They expected to find Africa on the other side of their own lake.
They must believe a magic carpet has flown them to Safi in Morocco in a matter of hours. From this ancient Phoenician port, Thor Heyerdahl has sailed the previous year. Now he wants the Indians to build Ra 2 from 12 tons of papyrus reeds he has transported from Lake Tana in Ethiopia. They find these reeds are even bigger and better than their own on Lake Titicaca. They rope thousands of reeds together into 2 huge bundles. Each bundle is lashed independently, using only a single spiral rope, and, as normal with them, a central bundle disappears from sight as the long ropes are pulled tight. A further bundle is added on top to each side to make a wider deck. After 6 weeks' work, Ra 2 is nearing completion. The Indians from Lake Titicaca are so eager to rejoin their families that they use only 2/3 of the available reeds. The boat they make is much smaller than Ra 1, 10 feet shorter, in fact, with far less volume than Heyerdahl has intended. Ra 2 is first launched in dry land and is navigated through the streets of Safi by Norman Baker, the expedition pilot. A ship like something out of ancient Egypt, but built by South American Indians. The wife of the local pasha baptizes Ra 2 in goat's milk. Heyerdahl's hopes are high, but he still has the bitter memory of his previous boat having failed. Under the flag of the United Nations, Ra 2 slides down the slipway, dry as blotting paper.
She floated like a paper swan on top of the waves. After 10 days in the harbor, we left port and sailed into the open Atlantic, heavily loaded with 6 tons of cargo and superstructure. For 2 days, we drove southwards along the African coast with good wind and high speed. We made an average of 4 knots, doing 95 nautical miles in 24 hours. Although we were immensely pleased with our speed, we soon had another serious problem to worry about. Ra 2 started sinking much faster than Ra 1. Our new ship seemed to be too small for the many tons of cargo she carried. The heavy load pressed us deeper and deeper into the water. While we clipped ourselves fast with lifelines so as not to fall overboard ourselves, we started to throw away anything not desperately needed. Our papyrus lifeboat went first. Santiago, our quartermaster like last time, went carefully through his inventory to find anything we could dump. This seemed to help. The sinking stopped. We continued our voyage in the direction of distant America, due west.
They are still in the coastal shipping lanes. After dark, their tiny paraffin lamps are hard to see from busy modern ships. The night watch plays his flashlight against their sail, hopefully to give a better warning. After 2 days and nights of excellent sailing, they suddenly come to a stop. They are becalmed. And they still have an enormous distance to go to America, most of which they have covered the year before.
As we woke up the third morning, the wind had died away. Our sail was no longer filled, and we found ourselves drifting helplessly to and fro without any visible progress. To film ourselves from the outside, we had a small rubber dinghy with room for 2 or 3 men. In the calm water, it was easy to observe small black clots of solidified oil. We had discovered the previous year endless quantities of oil lumps drifting about in the Atlantic Ocean, and the samples we delivered to the United Nations caused such wide interest that we decided this time to undertake a systematic daily investigation. The lumps were black and soft like tar or asphalt. We saw them every day, and sometimes they carried passengers of various kinds. In this case, a tiny crab. Day after day, no wind, no progress, only slow sinking on the same spot. To keep spirits high, even a university professor is willing to turn clown. Mexico and Egypt on the stage.
Oh, my yellow basket. Was it blue? No. Was it black? No. Just a little yellow basket. It is a basket. Oh, my yellow basket. Was it blue? No. Was it black? No. Just a little yellow basket. Ole.
As they drift aimlessly in the current between the Canary Islands and the coast of the Sahara, birds of many kinds fly by and frequently settle on board. They're fed and cared for, and Ra, too, begins to look like a floating aviary. Even a whale joins them, but is not close enough to have a decent portrait taken.
Among the birds was a ring-marked pigeon from Spain. We added another message to its foot. Stopped on Ra 2, 21st of May. Refusing to return to land like the other birds, the dove chose to stay with us as a symbol of the multinational expedition right across the Atlantic Ocean.
Familiar birds from northern lands, like old friends to Hayadar, pay visits to Ra too, and so do more exotic birds from the tropics. They seem to think the bundle boat is their nest. Without wind, it seems pointless to keep on steering, so they leave the rudder oars to take care of themselves. Instead, they begin swimming to tidy up the reeds below, and Surial, the frogman, uses his underwater camera. they make a disturbing discovery. With too little papyrus to carry too much cargo, more than half of the reed boat has been pressed below the surface. But as far as they can judge, the sinking appears to have stopped. Others arrive to make an inspection, including this grouper.
I was anxious myself to inspect the papyrus from underneath, and even more so the extremely thin rope which the Indians had insisted on using, claiming that the pressure would be evenly distributed along the continuous spiral. I found everything in perfect order.
Their floating aquarium includes a number of striped pilotfish, usually the hangers-on of sharks. They seem just as willing to attach themselves to Ra. Jellyfish and other members of that family drift by. In one area particularly polluted with oil, thousands of them are floating about, dead.
Even when we swam in clean water, small clots of oil often had to be brushed aside with our hands.
Safi, the monkey, is just as fed up with the drifting as anybody else. They even resort to rowing. As idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean.
Finally the wind returned, and we moved so fast that the lifebuoy had to be trailed behind on a rope as a safety precaution in case anybody fell overboard. It would be a last chance. We could not stop or turn back. We lived in intimate contact with the ocean. That is why we detected the pollution not visible from a big ship.
From now on, all bathing had to be done inside a net.
We were 8 men from 8 countries sleeping in the same basket. A Russian next to an American, an Arab from Egypt next to a Jew. There was ample fuel on board for a serious conflagration. Our paper boat was loaded with psychological petrol, and the heat generated by friction could only be extinguished by the endless waves.
Every day, Hayadar records experiences which make him understand the problems involved in ancient reed boat navigation. The nearest land is hidden in mist, but according to Baker, they must have just passed the Canary Islands. That is one map they won't need again. This time, like last, they carry food and water exactly as they had seen the ancient Egyptians do on the bas-reliefs in the tombs of the pharaohs. Some of their water is kept in goatskin bags, but much of it in big earthenware jars, as is most of their food. Almonds. Hard-baked bread, as in Pharaoh's Egypt. Raisins. Different kinds of nuts. Dates and various dried fruits. Cello, an ancient African expedition diet made from honey, ground nuts, flour, and other nourishing ingredients. Eggs, preserved in lime and water. Butter, salted and boiled in Berber fashion. They have plenty of ingredients to cook some delicious meals on their little paraffin stove.
We represented 8 different languages, but generally managed to communicate in English, French, or Italian. I was really happy with my multinational companions.
There are 8 men instead of 7 on the Ra-2 voyage. All of the original crew are on board except Abdullah of Chad, Africa, who could not come. Instead, they have along Madani Ait Uhani from Morocco, a hotel manager.
Oh, you slob. Anyone who drinks soup from a cup with 2 hands has got to...
And in addition to him, a Japanese cameraman, Kei Ohara, who has never sailed an ocean and who cooks oriental dishes when he isn't taking pictures.
All fantastic job.
Yes.
No. Yes.
Every day, they collect samples of oil pollution. A few times, the entire ocean surface is covered with lumps floating about in dirty gray water like that in a city sewer. But usually the lumps are bobbing about, far apart, in what otherwise appears to be clean water. They vary in size from a grain of wheat to a large potato. Some are completely covered with barnacles and other mollusks. The pollution is obviously affecting the life of marine creatures all over the ocean. They find that modern men have succeeded in polluting the Atlantic Ocean all the way from Africa to America. Fish are scared away from modern ships, but not from quietly floating papyrus bundles. They join the Ra expedition. Normally, the mariners leave the fish in peace, but sometimes they drop a fishing line out of longing for fresh varieties as a change from dried fish or Egyptian fish roe.
Questo qui deve essere libero. Sì. Vado più forte.
Va bene. This here. And you give it down the part. Give me this side. Yes.
One day, the crew members are shocked by a shout of "Man overboard." Surreal has taken a careless step and is soon left behind in the waves. Fortunately, the trailing lifeline saves him. But for that line, he would eventually have drowned. There is no way of turning back the ship.
C'est fou avec mon doigt, t'as vu mon doigt comment il était? T'as vu mon doigt qui va faire comme l'autre? Mon doigt?
Hyodor constantly has fears that the monkey will go overboard too, for she sometimes escapes from her lifeline and scuttles up the rigging, refusing to come down no matter how tempting the tidbits they offer.
You give him down little by little, you know? So that the sea goes west, it's very heavy, don't do it.
Yuri goes up the mast after her, but with no success, until he gets the idea of using Safi's pet toy as a lure, an ugly, squeaking rubber frog which she won't allow anyone else to play with. Though they are sailing through the tropics, the cooling breezes go through the wickerwork walls of their bamboo cabin. Baker calculates they're averaging 60 nautical miles a day, or more than 100 kilometers. June 15th. A month has passed. Africa is far, far behind, and the crew, with singing, celebrates having reached the halfway point of the voyage.
Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera. Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Antes de morir me quiero echar mis besos del alma. Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera, Guantanamera.
We got used to the ocean, and the cameramen sometimes ventured far away from our safe papyrus bundles. For 2 days and 2 nights we struggled helplessly without any kind of steering control, taking all the waves over us sideways.
The sail must come down. The wind catching it is wrenching the boat around to port, but at the same time the sail, if lowered, might be shredded or carried overboard by the waves. The situation is dangerous. They work anxiously and cautiously lest they capsize. Taking a leaf from the ancient Egyptian war books, they have fastened a security rope to the rudder oar blade, so at least the broken section is trailing behind and can be saved. The powerful waves snap the tree trunk like a toothpick.
Oh, we're turning again. Okay, just a minute.
And now they're in a desperate quandary. In the early days of calm, they threw all heavy wood overboard so that they wouldn't sink. Now they have no spar left to splice the broken log. They make a scale model of the shattered parts to see whether any of the fragments can span the long gap from the empty fork at sea level up to the steering bridge. They tie the rudder blade to the longest fragment of the handle, using ropes to give flexibility. In any case, they do not have a nail or screw in the entire boat.
Push it in.
George, it is not coming down. Can you pull your starboard preventer?
They get back on course again. Ra raises her tail to the waves and rides along with the trade winds towards America. The broken rudder oar is working once more, but the other one is jammed in the twisted fork and has to be chiseled free by the Japanese K.
Hold the helm there.
At last, the vessel is under full control, and they are able to hoist all sail. But with one oar broken and stunted, steering has become terribly complicated. The tiller of the unbroken starboard rudder can still be reached with the right hand, but the short fragment of the broken port side oar has to be pulled one way with a long bamboo rod and the other way by stepping on a rope, because the stunted shaft doesn't reach further than floor level. And there is still half the Atlantic to go.
Our deck had been pressed right down to sea level, as all our papyrus had become soaked from above as well as from below. The water which had tumbled over us unprotected sides in the days we drifted sideways without steering control had been absorbed above the waterline. This added weight pressed even our upper side rolls partly underwater. We were riding terribly low. Yet we were tremendously impressed to find that not a single papyrus reed had broken or come loose, and our thin spiral rope was entirely undamaged after the battle with the seas. Flexibility and toughness of reeds and ropes had saved our lives, whereas we had seen giant timber lose in the battle with the ocean.
To get some sort of shelter from the waves, they cut up their spare sail. The strips of canvas help protect them from breaking seas. To simplify the cumbersome steering, Heyerdahl suggests tilting the mast forward. This brings the sail right up into the bow. Because the sail is so far forward, it tangles with the papyrus bough, which they have to hack off. But with the sail pulling in front of the ship, they find it easy to keep their stern against the wind and waves. This is all that is needed to keep them on course, because the trade winds at their back always blow towards America.
You see them, Norman?
You see them?
They learn one day from their radio receiver that a United Nations research vessel is trying to find them.
Ah, there they are. Right dead astern. I really see them. They're coming right dead smack behind us astern. Do you see them, Santiago? Huh? Look, dead astern.
Oh, yes, I see it. Yes, yes, yes. I don't understand that. I thought that was last year. Well, I mean,
It is the Calamar from the West Indies.
Oh, Calamar! 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 Oh, Calamar!
Don't forget to steer.
Welcome to the American side of the ocean.
Untie! He dipped to us. We must return the salute. Untie the halyard down there, somebody. Adire, s'il vous plaît. Laissez le corde là. Bob, where have you been hiding?
Hey!
We've been right here all the time.
Välkommen! Good night! Good night! Good night!
Next morning, the Calamar has been lost far behind. She has turned off her engines, but has drifted much more slowly than Ra. When she does catch up again, she stays for 2 days to study marine life that has gathered under the quietly drifting reed boat. After 2 days, the Calamar leaves them for her home port and disappears in the direction of the Caribbean. The perked up papyrus stern acts as an extra sail, and to get a better balance to the ship, they decided to saw the stern off as well. But in slicing off a piece of their ship fore and aft, they also sever the long spiral rope binding the whole ship together. Fortunately, the wet papyrus has swollen so grossly that the rope is squeezed hard and can't be pulled out, even by force. By this time, they have entered the area east of the West Indies, where nearly all American hurricanes are born, with the hurricane season expected to begin at any time.
Norman could also confirm that the islands were very near and that we had entered American shipping lanes. We were lucky to escape any hurricane. Our deck had remained at sea level the whole of the last month, but we were not sinking any further. Then one day, Barbados Island was so near that the government boat, the Culpeper, was sent out to welcome us.
The Culpeper followed along on our last leg towards Barbados. We expected to see it any moment. No sooner had we sighted land than a number of small boats came out to welcome us. Now we were so near that houses could be seen ashore, and we sailed westward along the island towards the capital, Bridgetown. Outside the port of Bridgetown, the sail of Ra, with its symbol of the sun, went down for the last time, and the Culpeper towed us through the traffic into port.
They are given a great welcome by the people of Barbados, the Prime Minister, and an American delegation from the Knights of Malta. This time, Heyerdahl has reached his goal. After 57 days, his paper boat, Ra 2, has sailed more than 3,000 nautical miles right across the Atlantic. In dock, they can see that Ra 2 is virtually undamaged, except for the bow and stern, which they themselves have sawn off. The bottom is completely covered with barnacles from the long voyage. Scarcely one reed is broken or loose, although they have absorbed water to their maximum capacity. The flexible reeds have proven to be more resistant to the beatings of the ocean than the strong, rigid timbers.
The voyage of Ra had proved that the papyrus boat neither sinks nor disintegrates on a voyage into the open ocean. It had also proved that it was possible for men to live together in peace even under stress and difficult conditions, and irrespective of nationality, skin color, political background, or religious beliefs, as long as they cooperate for common survival. Contrary to all scientific opinions, it was perfectly possible to cross the Atlantic in an ancient type of reed boat. In studying the origins of pre-Columbian civilization in ancient America, science must, in the future, take into account the fact that it is possible that some ideas, some inspiration, might have reached the Indians of tropical America long before the dawn of written history.